Hi, my name is Chris Jackson. I've been practicing business law for over 25 years, and today we are going to discuss which state is the best state in which you should form your limited liability company and why. First question, though, that I want to answer is why shouldn't you just form it in your home state? Well, unless you're living in one of the three states that I'm going to recommend, there are some reasons you should consider not forming your LLC in your home state. I've seen a lot of advice on this channel. Don't bother forming an estate outside your home state because you're going to have to incur some extra fees, etc. And that may be true, and that is the one downside, but from a liability protection standpoint and an anonymity standpoint, you are best off forming your limited liability company in either Nevada or Delaware or Wyoming. I'm going to go over all three. I'm going to give you the pros and cons of each, and then I'm going to tell you what I recommend. As you can see, my dog here is sitting behind me. I have tried to get him to sit somewhere else, but he wants to be part of almost every one of my videos, at least until he's ready to jump down off the chair. Let's say you live in California and you are doing business in California. Why not just set up a California limited liability company? Answer is that those three states are designed to protect you, the member, and to protect the LLC from liabilities of the member, and also to provide some anonymity as to who the owner of the company is and or who the manager of that company is. And those are three important factors. One factor is if your LLC gets sued, we want to make sure that the plaintiff in the lawsuit cannot get beyond the assets of the LLC to your personal assets. When you form a limited liability company, the whole purpose of doing that is to limit your liability to the amount that you invested in the limited liability company and nothing more. If a plaintiff in a lawsuit can sue your limited liability company, do what's called pierce the corporate veil, in this case it's the LLC veil, of protection, which protects the member owners of the LLC, and then get to your personal assets like your car, your house, your stocks, furniture, cash in your bank account. If they can do that, then it defeats the purpose of the limited liability company. And there are protections for a member of a limited liability company in every single state. However, some states protect the owner, the member, their personal assets more than other states. This is especially true if you have a single member LLC. Single member limited liability companies are the easiest to pierce. What are the components that make up piercing the corporate veil? Well, are you really acting like your entity is separate from yourself? Are you keeping a separate bank account? Do you have an operating agreement? You're not commingling funds. There are certain things that the courts will look at to determine whether or not you are treating the entity as separate from yourself. If you're not, especially in certain states, the plaintiffs in those lawsuits can go after your personal assets. So we want to prevent that from happening. These three states are very good about preventing the piercing of the corporate veil, especially for single member LLCs, which are at more risk than multi-member LLCs in terms of piercing the corporate veil. So that's number one, is protecting you, the member of the limited liability company, from the liabilities incurred by the LLC. So we want to make sure we do that. Number two, let's say you, the member, are worried about having personal liabilities, and then the creditors or the plaintiffs in a lawsuit might be able to get after your LLC's assets or the interest that you own in the LLC, or they could shut down the LLC. For example, I have a client just last week that came to me and said, hey, I want to set up an LLC. This is the state I live in. This is the state I'm buying rental property in. What do you recommend? Because I have some concerns, not only about piercing the corporate veil, but I also want to make sure that I have a child that's about to start driving. What if they get into an accident and then I get sued as the parent? How can I protect my interest in that limited liability company? And so most states have what's called a charging order. Not all states, but most states have what's called a charging order. What that means is, let's say that I am sued because my son got into a car accident and my insurance doesn't cover the amount of the liability. So the plaintiff in the lawsuit against me personally wants to go after my other assets. One of my assets is the membership interest that I own in this limited liability company. Depending upon the state, the plaintiff in the lawsuit against me could get into my LLC and essentially shut it down and liquidate all the assets and then collect those assets. In other states, like California, for example, they can't do that. They cannot shut down the LLC, but they can foreclose on my LLC interest, go sell it, and use that to help pay down whatever debt I owe to this plaintiff. In certain states, the charging order is limited to distributions of income to the member. So if I have a limited liability company, they can put what's called a charging order, which is a lien on my LLC's economic interest, the right to receive profit distributions. But that is not the case in California, and in other states, they can do worse. We want to make sure that those charging orders are limited to the distributions of profits and nothing more than that. They can't sell your membership interest. They can't get involved in the management of the company. They can't liquidate the assets of the LLC. They are limited to receiving distributions from the LLC if those distributions are made. And in many cases, if you can just determine not to make any distributions, and that way your creditor gets nothing. So it gives you some leverage against the creditor if you have your LLC in a state with really good charging order protections, especially for single member LLCs. And that is not always the case. If you're a single member LLC in certain states, you have no protection whatsoever. Because the whole premise of the charging order protection was to protect the other members, not just your membership interests. However, these three states, Wyoming, Delaware, and Nevada, they will protect you, the single member, from creditors that are limited just to charging orders against distributions. The third factor I like to look at is anonymity. Do I want to disclose that, let's say I own a rental property in North Carolina. I live in another state. Do I want the rental property tenant to know who I am? If there's a lawsuit, I want to make it difficult for them to know who the real owner is. So in the states of Wyoming and Nevada and Delaware, there is anonymity. There's nothing listed on their public website who the owner is or who the manager is. So the question is, which states do I recommend and why? And I mentioned all three states. One is Nevada, one is Wyoming, and one is Delaware. So Delaware is commonly known as business friendly, and I think it is a good state in which to form your LLC. If you have investors that you're planning on bringing in, some may require you to establish your entity in Delaware. If you don't see yourself as taking on investors that require you to be within the jurisdiction of Delaware, I wouldn't recommend Delaware because you have to pay $300 annually to the state of Delaware if you have a limited liability company. It could be a lot more than that if you have a corporation. So Delaware is a good option. I still don't think it's the best option. So how about Nevada versus Wyoming? Nevada costs $425 to establish your entity in Nevada, and then you have an annual fee. One is a business license fee of $200, and then there's a $150 fee annually that you have to pay when you present your list of members and managers to the state of Nevada. Wait a minute, Chris, you said that Nevada keeps that information anonymous. That is true. They keep it anonymous to the public, but they know the information. There's always a chance there could be a data breach where people will find out who are the members and who are the managers of Nevada limited liability companies, or maybe they change their mind and they decide in the future, hey, we're no longer going to keep that information anonymous. Maybe there's a lawsuit that requires them to disclose it. They know it. They know it because you have to file it every year, and because you have to file it every year, you have to pay $150 for that in addition to a $200 business license fee. So they say no taxes in Nevada, and that's true. There are no taxes in Nevada, but you have to pay $350 a year. Delaware, you have to pay $300 a year. Wyoming, that is the one I recommend. I have been putting my clients who have either corporations or limited liability companies in Wyoming, And the reason is because they have the asset protections. They protect single member LLCs from piercing the corporate veil. They also protect your LLC against creditors of your members, so their charging orders are specific to distributions. I like that. They don't ask for the name of your member or the manager, so they don't even know that information. So there's no need to worry about a data breach or them being forced to disclose at a later date. Importantly, in the state of Wyoming, they passed a law in 2016 because in 2014 there was a piercing the corporate veil case. And it was a good case for piercing the corporate veil, and the Supreme Court in the state of Wyoming allowed the piercing of the veil of this limited liability company. So the legislature decided to make it even more difficult to pierce the corporate veil. They passed a new law in 2016, and in that law, there's basically 4 factors that are considered when determining whether a plaintiff in a lawsuit against the LLC can pierce the corporate veil and go after the members' assets. And those 4 factors are pretty hard to prove. And you have to prove at least 2 out of the 4 factors, unless one of the factors is fraud. If they can demonstrate fraud, you only have to show fraud. But it makes it very difficult for a plaintiff in a lawsuit to pierce the corporate veil. Wyoming has specifically made their state business friendly. California, by way of example, has 24 different factors that a court can consider in determining whether or not you can pierce the corporate veil of a California limited liability company to get at the assets of the members. And importantly, the fees. Now, the filing fee is $100 in Wyoming. It's $90 in the state of Delaware. So Delaware has Wyoming beat there. As I said, it's $425 in the state of Nevada. But annually, thereafter, you have to pay $60 only. There is one caveat as to the fee in Wyoming. It's $60 a year, and that assumes, however, that you have $300,000 or less in assets that the LLC owns in Wyoming. So if you don't have a house or property or something of that nature in Wyoming, then you don't need to worry about that. Hey Jax, I'm making a video right now, okay? Just try to keep quiet here. All right, buddy? Try to keep quiet, and I'll let you sit here. All right, love you. Okay, so we have the Wyoming LLC. That's where I recommend you set it up. By the way, I'm going to show you how to create your own Wyoming LLC in my next video. So we have the Wyoming LLC. The question now is what to do about the state in which you're doing business. So let's just say that you set up the Wyoming LLC for liability and anonymity purposes, and you have a rental property that you ultimately want to own in the state of California. Question is, should you qualify this Wyoming LLC to do business in the state of California? Or should you think about perhaps having a California limited liability company as the wholly owned subsidiary of the Wyoming LLC, so that you have 2 companies essentially. So once again, you can have the Wyoming LLC own the property directly in the state of California. If you do that, you should qualify it to do business in the state of California, because otherwise, if your tenant is not paying rent, you want to have the ability to sue them unless your Wyoming LLC, as the owner of the California property, is qualified to do business in California. That Wyoming LLC cannot sue the tenant. Question is that the best structure for you? What are the downsides of qualifying your Wyoming LLC to do business in California? Number 1, what does that mean for piercing the corporate veil? Let's just say there's an issue on the property, there's a slip and fall, you get sued. Question is, can the plaintiff in the lawsuit related to your rental property in California, what law will be applied when they sue the Wyoming LLC for that liability? And that is up to the courts. Traditionally and generally speaking, they will apply the law of the state of formation, which in this case would be Wyoming, and that would be a good thing. Will that always be the case? Not necessarily. There is a slight risk that they will apply California law to try to pierce the corporate veil. And as I said before, California law is a little bit easier to pierce the corporate veil than Wyoming law is. We want to make sure that Wyoming law applies, so the best thing you can do, if you're just going to qualify your Wyoming entity in California to do business, then you should make sure that all the contracts you enter into, your lease agreement, other contracts, that you are using Wyoming law as your choice of law. That will minimize the likelihood that California law will be applied in a piercing the corporate veil situation. The next question is, what about charging orders? Okay, again, if I get sued personally in the state of California because my son got into a car accident, the question is my membership interest in the Wyoming LLC protected from a personal lawsuit against me here in California? What law will apply? California or Wyoming? The problem here is that because the Wyoming LLC has qualified to do business in California, it has availed itself to California laws. The California law is less likely to apply on a piercing the corporate veil situation. However, it is more likely to apply in a charging order situation. So in that case, California gives the plaintiff in a lawsuit against me personally a little bit more opportunity to disrupt the limited liability company in the state of Wyoming, because in addition to having a lien against the distributions made to me through the Wyoming LLC, it can also foreclose and sell my interest in the LLC, and I don't want that. So if I want the ultimate protection package with regard to my membership interest in Wyoming and the liabilities that I might incur in the state of California, the best thing I can do is have the Wyoming LLC own as a subsidiary a California LLC. The California LLC owns the property. So in a piercing the corporate veil situation, we've added an additional layer of protection, because if there is a liability that's incurred, say, in this rental property, they first have to sue the California LLC, and if they're trying to get at my personal assets, they got to first go through the California LLC, and then they have to go through the Wyoming LLC, because the Wyoming LLC owns the California LLC, to get behind the Wyoming LLC to me, the person who is the owner of the Wyoming LLC. There's an additional layer of protection, and there's Wyoming law that's going to apply when you're trying to pierce the Wyoming LLC to get to me. In addition, on a charging order situation, because the Wyoming LLC is in Wyoming and has not qualified to do business in California, and therefore has not availed itself to the California laws, Wyoming law is going to apply. There may be some changes with respect to courts, but right now the situation, if you have a Wyoming LLC that owns a California LLC that owns the rental property, Wyoming law is going to apply both on a piercing the corporate veil situation and a charging order situation. And that, like I said, is the ultimate protective package for you, the member, and also for the assets that you have in a limited liability company. And by the way, I'm going to show you in my next video how to set up a Wyoming limited liability company on your own, such that you can have it set up the very next day by doing it online. I'm going to take you through that step by step. It's quick, it's easy, and I encourage you to watch that video if you intend to set up an LLC in Wyoming. I hope you enjoyed this video and you learned some things. If you have any questions, put them in the comments section underneath the video. I address them usually the same day every time I get a question or comment. If you like this video, I encourage you to press the thumbs up button, and if you want more content like this, I really encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I thank you for your time. I wish you the best of luck in your business and with your LLC. Have a great day. Thank you.